coming on the air with this split screen of climate disasters, right? Fires out west and then flooding in Kentucky where 35 people have died. People tell us they've basically lost everything. And the weather that's coming could make it even harder to help out the folks who aren't out of the woods yet. We've got that forecast. Plus, new reaction from the State Department tonight saying it'll back House Speaker Nancy Pelosi on whatever she wants to do during her trip to Asia, even if that includes a trip to Taiwan. This is a pretty touchy subject since it's not going to make China very happy, but that probably will not stop the speaker. We'll explain the geopolitical pickle. And with midterm season heating up, your For You page on TikTok may see a little more than just dance videos and recipes and makeup tutorials, how some candidates are now using it in tonight's original. Plus, the FBI tonight has somebody in custody who walked up to the front door of a famous Iranian journalist with a military-style rifle. You see this? We've got some video now of her getting back to her house and what she's saying tonight. Plus, the government's got a best-selling witness in its fight to stop two of the world's biggest publishing companies from merging. Why Stephen King is against this deal later in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and we've talked about this split screen of these climate crises with fires in the west and flooding in the east. And we'll start with that devastating news out of Kentucky, where Governor Andy Beshear says at least 35 people have been killed after flooding has just demolished the eastern part of the state. Do you see this? Help's coming, right? Help's on the way, but it's not like it's super easy since at least 50 bridges to cross some of these rivers are damaged in some way. Kayaks are still out there looking for hundreds of people who are still not accounted for. The concern that more rain is on the way. The governor adding this other just awful detail that the state needed to call in refrigerator trucks because the morgues are overflowing. And we're hearing devastating stories about the victims, like the brothers and sisters you see on screen in Knott County. 4 of them swept away. Their parents left clinging to a tree for 6 hours before being rescued by somebody in a kayak. Our Maggie Vespa talked with a grandmother who watched her son's home float off.
We can't dwell on that because it's gone. We have to start over. We've lost 4 houses, a couple of vehicles, all our farm equipment. I mean, technically, there's nothing else left for us to lose.
And then there's California with at least 2 dead in the 55,000-acre McKinney fire, the biggest in the state this year. And right now, if you're wondering how much of it is contained, none of it, 0%. And in just the last hour, the Biden administration is doing something new to try to help people in the way of these huge climate disasters. Vice President Kamala Harris talking today from Miami to try to unlock $1 billion in federal grants to help communities through events like the ones you're looking at tonight.
Climate change has become a climate crisis, and a threat has now become a reality.
We'll get to Gotti Schwartz on the fire and Al Roker on the forecast in just a sec. But I want to start with George Solis in Jackson, Kentucky. And George, the forecast is the big concern here, right? Potentially more rain on the way. That's going to make everything so much harder.
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. It's really just adding insult to injury. Behind me, you might be able to see the river. It is raging. People's belongings just flowing down from upstream. We have seen an increase of this throughout the day. Can you imagine people just driving by, watching their belongings flowing down the river? And we are seeing more people drive into neighborhoods out here, getting back to their homes, what may be left of them. And as you mentioned, in many cases, these roads and bridges completely inaccessible. There are people that are still stranded at this point, which is why you have the National Guard from Kentucky and neighboring states all rushing out there in any kind of vehicle they can to try and get to these people who have not had any utilities, maybe any food for the last several days. Here on the ground, we've watched volunteers hand out food and water to people who have been stopping by, just to give you a sense of the resiliency of the community out here. All this while they're contending with that death toll that continues to rise. 35 lives lost, presumably more in the coming days, and not to mention all of those 100 that are still missing. We still don't even have an accurate count because of the floods. There's still people that are also displaced, many of them at the Red Cross, many of them at shelters right now around the state. Very, very emotional for the people that have been out here. And as you can imagine, very little silver lining out here. But if there's one thing that people are looking forward to, a little bit of cell service and a little bit of hope that they'll be able to communicate with their missing loved ones. Hallie?
George Solis, thank you for that reporting. I appreciate it. I want to go to California now, where Gotti Schwartz is posted up following those fires. And Gotti, there's this local sheriff who says basically this thing exploded over the weekend, right? You've got triple-digit temperatures, thunderstorms making it so much harder.
Yeah, triple-digit temperatures, thunderstorms that keep sending down lightning that's sparking even more new fires. Last night we saw a dozen new fires. And Hallie, all of it is happening in an area that has been under extreme drought for years. Now, the hope is that some of these thunderstorms will bring at least some rain, slow the fire down, and that's what we've been seeing a little bit throughout last night and into today, with crews now saying that they've gone from about 0% containment to about 1% now. But as this fire continues to spread, we know that it is more than 50,000 acres. We know that a lot of it has damaged the small town of Klamath River, where scores of homes have been destroyed. We've seen their community center there in rubble. Right now, thousands of people have been evacuated as more erratic weather is expected to pick up later today as well as tomorrow and stretch all the way into Wednesday. Hallie?
We know that this is deadly, Gotti, right? This is now a deadly fire. Officials found 2 people in their car. Talk about the evacuation push, right? Because thousands of people, as you've alluded to here, have to get out of their homes. They've got to run. This is like the nightmare scenario, I know, if you live in California, when you know that a fire is in the vicinity.
Absolutely. And you have now 2 people who have been confirmed to have passed away in their car, in their driveway. Authorities say that they may have been trying to get away from the flames. And so authorities have been going from house to house, issuing reverse 911 calls to tens of thousands of people in the area. They've also evacuated about 60 hikers in the backcountry on the Pacific Crest Trail, a very popular trail around this time. But when it comes to many people in these communities, we've spoken to some of them that have decided to stay. They say that the fire they think is still far enough away that they can continue to try to clear out some of the brush around their homes and then possibly watch for any spot fires, any embers that may land on their property and quickly put them out. But authorities say the problem with that is if too many people decide to do that, or if the winds kick up and this fire becomes extremely erratic, which is what we've seen time and time again, and makes a run, then people will either be trapped inside their homes or possibly trapped on the road, which is where a lot of the fatalities we've seen in other California fires over the year have taken place. So right now, authorities are saying if you live inside of that fire zone, you need to get out now while you still can. Hallie?
Gotti Schwartz live for us there in California. Gotti, thank you. I want to bring in Al Roker now. Al, let me start with the forecast here and those storms coming to Kentucky. How much worse is it going to get?
Well, Hallie, it really, we're looking at a big problem tonight because we do have a flood threat through tomorrow morning. Take a look right now from Elkins, West Virginia to Somerset. We have the risk of flooding, rainfall rates of up to 1 to 2 inches per hour possible. And as we put the radar on top of that, you can see we are looking at some heavier showers and thunderstorms down to our south. However, we do have a risk of severe weather from Omaha, Nebraska, all the way into Kentucky. 7 million people at risk, but we talk about wind gusts. The biggest problem, though, going to be these downpours because the ground is super saturated. It can't take any more. So what would normally not be a problem, maybe an inch of rain or so, that's going to cause more flash flooding, and that's going to cause big problems. You can see the heaviest rain right now looks like it's going to be to the north, but as you look down into Kentucky, anywhere from 1 to 2 inches of rain, Hallie, and that could, in fact, be devastating.
Al, there's also, we always talk about the climate factor and this heat wave now that's coming in on top of all this.
That's right. We are, we're looking at more and more heat waves, longer duration, higher temperatures, and that's what we're seeing. And in places we're not used to seeing it. As you know, we've been looking at the Pacific Northwest. And as we look, there are heat warnings, heat advisories for the Pacific Northwest into the plains, and those stretch into the Midwest for 25 million people. The deal is jet stream way up to the north. And so look at some of these air temperatures. Triple digits in Omaha, 101, but it's going to feel like 106. Oklahoma City, 101, feeling like 105. Memphis, 93. That's going to feel like 103. And then we move on into Wednesday. Triple-digit air temperatures, or I should say feels like temperatures, for Nashville, for Louisville, for Chicago. It's going to feel like 106 degrees in St. Louis with an air temperature of 97. And, Hallie, that's going to shift to the east with temperatures well above the air that feels like temperatures, feeling like 100 in New York and Washington, D.C., down on into Atlanta. Virginia. And guess what? Going into next week, really no relief in sight as far as above average temperatures. And in fact, the plains are going to be much warmer than average. And again, as we take a look, Gotti was talking about the McKinney wildfire. The big problem, it is bone dry, extreme low humidity, almost 56,000 acres with 0% containment. The big problem, those winds are blowing to the north, and we've got the threat. These storms, I have a friend who's a farmer there. They own a farm, a ranch called Five Mary's Farms, and overnight they were listening to lightning, they were listening to thunder, because these storms, these firestorms are creating their own atmosphere, their own thunderstorms. And the problem is you'll get these dry lightning strikes that will set off more fires, and the wind carries the smoke and ash and sparks north and east and creates a greater fire danger, Hallie.
Which is so scary. And they call them fire-breathing dragon clouds or something like that, right, Al? Because of the noise that it makes, and because of the atmospherics.
Somebody said it was like it's the atmospherics and the noise. I mean, it literally creates its own atmosphere, creates these dry lightning storms, these wind funnels that you've seen, the fire devils. But the biggest problem are these lightning strikes from these thunderstorms. They don't produce any rain, but they produce lightning, and that causes more fires.
Al Roker, glad to have you with us tonight. I know we'll be checking the latest on your forecast tomorrow morning on the Today Show. Appreciate it, friend. New tonight here in Washington, the longest sentence yet for somebody connected with the January 6th insurrection. But it's still not as long as what prosecutors wanted. We're talking about somebody named Guy Reffitt, who got just over 7 years in prison. He never made it into the Capitol itself, but video evidence showed him egging on the crowd and leading other rioters up some stairs outside the building. Prosecutors say he tried to storm the Capitol and was planning to target House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Right before he was sentenced, Reffitt dropped a few F-bombs in court. He apologized, saying he effed up and deeply regrets everything. Ken Delaney is joining us now on this. And Ken, this sentence is on the lower end of what prosecutors had wanted. Prosecutors wanted more. This was on the lower end of the sentencing recommendations, right? And there were some sentencing enhancements that the government was trying to get. In layman's terms, they basically wanted the book thrown at this guy because they think this is, in effect, domestic terrorism, right? Walk us through the judge's decision here.
Yeah, so the judge sentenced Guy Reffitt to a sentence that, as you said, is on the lower end of what the federal sentencing guidelines called for, that complicated mathematical formula based on a whole host of factors. But before she did that, she ruled against the government in a crucial moment here, where the Department of Justice, for the first time, said, we are going to label this case domestic terrorism. We are applying this so-called domestic terrorism sentencing enhancement. Because remember, there is no crime of domestic terrorism in federal law. So this is the only way they can do it. It's a sentencing enhancement that was passed after the Oklahoma City bombing. And it applies to certain crimes. And they said it applies here because they said he was motivated in part because he wanted to influence the government by coercion or intimidation. But the judge said, no, I'm not going to do that because you haven't sought that enhancement essentially in a host of other cases where people assaulted police officers and destroyed federal property and committed violence. And so that could create an improper sentencing disparity. So this is sort of it's a double-sided coin here. This is the longest sentence that the government has gotten. As you said, the previous longest was 5 years, so in any J6 case. But it's also kind of a pretty big setback for the Justice Department that had asked for 15 years in prison for Guy Reffitt, because he's a man who showed up with a gun to the Capitol, and while he didn't go in, he was convicted of threatening his children when they contemplated turning him into the FBI. There was evidence that he had held a gun to his wife's head. So prosecutors really painted him as a malevolent figure, but the judge didn't 100% buy it, Hallie.
We haven't heard from Reffitt until now, so it was interesting to me, Ken, because he didn't speak on his behalf during the trial. In sentencing, he did, and we said sort of how colorful it was. He says, I effed up, right? He says, I was excuse my language here, but an effing idiot, for example. The judge kind of looked at him and she said, well, wait a second. And I'm paraphrasing. She said, you were still saying all this stuff about being a patriot and pro-January 6th, even while you were behind bars. And he said, well, that was because I wanted to raise money for my family. It was kind of a fundraising tactic. There was a money factor that was involved here. She seemed skeptical of that.
She seems skeptical. I think a lot of people are skeptical because Guy Reffitt for months was completely unrepentant, even after he was convicted. And his wife, going into court today, was fairly defiant. And she has said in the past that, January 6th defendants should not plead guilty. this was sort of an 11th hour conversion here. On the eve of sentencing, he's apologized and said he regretted his actions. And the judge essentially said, why should I believe you? I mean, how could you possibly be telling the truth? Because she also criticized the fact that from jail, he was portraying himself as a martyr and, expressing support for the idea that the election was stolen and that, this was essentially a rebellion, as she portrayed it, against the government and very dangerous. So she wasn't really buying it, Hallie.
Ken Delanian, thank you for being on top of that one, breaking late this afternoon. Appreciate it. Secretary of State Tony Blinken saying the State Department will support House Speaker Nancy Pelosi if she decides to visit Taiwan during her trip to Asia this week. She's in Asia now. If she goes to Taiwan, it would be a controversial move and a rare instance of something that puts the Speaker and some Republicans on the same side against the White House. Think about the politics of that, right? If she does go, you could see China escalating militarily. Not great. If she does not go, Pelosi could open herself up to criticism of, giving in to what Beijing wants. And this is Nancy Pelosi, after all, the same Nancy Pelosi who early on in her congressional career did this, right? You're looking at it. Visited Tiananmen Square to honor the protesters, some of whom died 2 years earlier fighting for political freedom. Pelosi is a China critic, and China knows it, which is why they're not thrilled at all about the potential for this Taiwan trip, given how much of a flashpoint Taiwan is for the U.S.-China relationship. Officials in Beijing saying today its military would not, and I'm quoting here, sit idly by. Right? So the military would not sit idly by if Pelosi does visit. China has claimed Taiwan as part of its territory. The U.S. recognizes that claim but does not endorse it. So Beijing sees any type of official American contact with Taiwan as encouragement towards full independence. With that as the backdrop, let me bring in Dan DeLuce now. And Dan, if Pelosi were to go, she would be the first speaker to visit Taiwan in something like 25 years. And the implications are real here, kind of on either side.
This is a really difficult kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. I think you've heard critics of the Biden administration saying they should never have spoken about it publicly. That would have given them the ability to discreetly ask her not to go ahead with it. But it's at this point, I think it's very difficult for the speaker to call off the trip because, as you say, it would be seen to be caving in to pressure from China. I think it's important to point out at this point, the Pentagon is not seeing any imminent sign of some kind of military action by China, but certainly I think there's an expectation there will be some kind of a response, military exercises, flying aircraft near Taiwan as they have in the past, some kind of provocative exercises that will be a form of response there. But I think the biggest concern the White House has and the administration has is a misunderstanding, a miscalculation, not an intentional attack, but some kind of an incident that spins out of control. So you're right, the stakes are very high. This is not just some minor event.
Dan DeLuce. Dan, thank you for that breakdown. I know a lot of eyes are watching Speaker Pelosi on her trip to Asia as she is there right now. We've got some breaking news that is just coming into us in the last couple of minutes, just as we've been on the air. And it involves a kind of surprise speech from President Biden, who's set to deliver it tonight at 7:30 Eastern. OK, so just a little bit from now, on what the White House is calling a successful counterterrorism operation. I want to bring in now NBC White House correspondent Monica Alba. Mon, this was not on the official White House schedule until like 5 minutes ago, basically. And what little we know involves is something related to al-Qaeda, yes?
Yes, and to Afghanistan, it turns out, Hallie, according to a senior administration official, all we know right now is that the president will be speaking at 7:30 p.m. about a successful counterterrorism operation against a significant al-Qaeda target in Afghanistan. Again, to be clear, they say this operation was, in their words, successful, and there were no civilian casualties. Now, just to pull back the curtain a little bit on how this comes together when there's such late-breaking news and such a close hold, of course, the president didn't have anything on his schedule all day today, but that's also because he's on day 3 of COVID isolation from his so-called rebound case. But he also didn't have anything over the weekend, clearly monitoring things, as presidents often do when these national security events take place. And he couldn't physically probably be in the Situation Room, again, due to his positivity from that rebound case, even though he doesn't have new symptoms. He was monitoring everything and doing calls, we understand, from the White House residence. So we're going to learn a lot more about this operation again, which they are calling successful, from senior officials here around 6 p.m. And then the president is going to speak at 7:30 p.m. Now, you may be wondering, a president who's positive with COVID right now, again, even if he doesn't have symptoms, how does that work? He's going to be speaking from the Blue Room balcony. So he will be outdoors. There will be a very limited number of staff, we're told, and reporters who will be at a safe distance from him when he does address the nation on this counterterrorism operation. So once we learn more about that, we will bring it to you. But this is one of those things that when the White House calls what's known as a lunch lid until 5:30 p.m., you scratch your head on a day where he has no events. Why is everybody sticking around? Well, now we have the answer.
That is a good insidery nugget, Mon. It's very true. I also, if memory serves, I think the last time that we saw the president delivering remarks on a significant counterterrorism operation, as the White House is talking about, was back in February as it related to an ISIS leader here. This is a moment, any instance like this, right, any operation that is, as the White House has successfully carried out on a terror target, is a moment for the president to show that they are serious, right, whoever the president is, about going after people who seek to do the United States harm. It is a significant moment for the president now, particularly given, Mon, the COVID backdrop that you've talked about.
That's absolutely right, Hallie. And actually, to be perfectly honest, I believe that happened almost exactly 6 months ago on the day that I gave birth to my son, and I was in the hospital, and I remember seeing some lower chyrons about the raid, but I didn't actually cover it. But yes, to put it into the timeline, that was about 6 months ago that President Biden did speak about that, and it was a very similar, I believe, nature of events that led to it, which is that, of course, when this is taking place behind the scenes, you have no idea that these counterterrorism operations are ongoing, and it's only after they have been completed, that they have been successful, that then the White House wants to obviously come out, share as many details as possible, and then, of course, the president wants to come out and speak specifically to the moment of national security. When we talk about Afghanistan, notably also, August is a significant month. We're talking about soon the 1-year anniversary here coming up in terms of exiting the war in Afghanistan. So I think the president will also potentially touch on that in his speech tonight.
Monica Alba, it is quite the welcome back from maternity leave. It is good to see you. We're glad you're with us, and we will be watching you, I am sure, throughout the rest of the night with this breaking news from the White House. Thanks, Mon. Protesters supporting veterans groups have been camping out on the steps of the Capitol for days. They stayed overnight again. Super furious about the GOP delay of a bill that would give more health care to vets who've gotten sick from burn pits and the toxins in them while serving overseas. You just saw a picture of Jon Stewart. He's been advocating for this bill for years. It looked like it was going to pass. It looked like everything was all systems go until a wrench in things late last week. Today, Stewart was, not surprisingly, livid. Watch.
Let's spend $6 trillion on a war, but not buy incinerators to burn everything that comes from that war. Let's make sure that their health and their safety is as little protected as possible.
All of this comes as Senator Joe Manchin says today he expects to speak with Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema today, presumably about this huge spending bill on climate and health care that is expected on the floor for a vote this week. The bill has money in it for energy, for, as we said, health care, for tax increases on corporations. Manchin is a yes on the bill. He worked on this deal with Schumer, but Sinema so far stayed pretty quiet about where she is. We don't really know, and therein lies the question. I want to bring in Scott Wong now. Let me take this in 3 buckets, Scott, and I want to lay them out, right? I feel like I'm writing my college thesis here. Let's talk about this bill. Let's talk about this burn pits bill, and then let's talk about the potential connection between the two. So as it relates to this climate and health care bill, Senator Sinema is the big question mark. Senator Manchin says he wants to talk to her today. Did they talk? Do we know how it went? Do we know where she is?
We don't have confirmation that they talked, Hallie, but obviously a lot of action happening both inside and outside the Capitol. What Senator Sinema has said is not much. She's been pretty quiet ever since Joe Manchin announced this deal with Chuck Schumer last week. One area that we are closely watching on Capitol Hill is this provision known as the closing of the carried interest loophole. It helps private equity managers, pay lower taxes. And this is an area that Sinema says she doesn't want to do anything on. She has been long opposed to this. And so this is one area of a potential, compromise with Senator Sinema, where they could, get something done and she could sign off on this package. But so far, nothing confirmed from the senator from Arizona.
Scott, we said we would talk about now this burn pits bill, right? It's called the PACT Act. Tell me where that stands. And what some Democrats, I think, are pointing to as a connection, perhaps, between Republicans' initial support of this bill and then what happened with Senator Schumer, Senator Manchin, et cetera, and this change of posture.
Well, Democrats and some of these veteran groups that have been camped outside the Capitol have pointed to the Manchin Schumer deal as this, as this major package that was announced, and then shortly thereafter, Republicans blocked the burn pits bill. And so there's a lot of speculation that Republicans were frustrated, angry with that broader package, and took some retribution out on Democrats. Obviously, what's surprising is that Republicans traditionally have been aligned with veterans groups. And now it's veterans groups that are protesting the Republicans outside the Capitol. I mean, they're holding up signs, Hallie, that say something like, Republicans are killing the PACT Act. They're also killing veterans. So, these veterans are furious. They want to get something done. Mitch McConnell has said earlier today, under pressure, Republicans will indeed move forward on the PACT Act. We'll see that happen likely later this week.
Scott Wong, live for us on the Hill. Scott, thank you. Tonight, NBC's Lester Holt sits down with the parents of Austin Tice, 10 years after their son, a Marine Corps veteran, was kidnapped in Syria while he was working as a freelance journalist. His parents, Deborah and Mark, they've met with President Biden, and they tell Lester they are sure their son is still alive.
As you approach this 10th anniversary, what do you want people to know, take away?
We have faith that Austin's going to come home, but that it's going to take some action.
We have no idea if Austin will see this, but knowing him and knowing you, do you think he has any doubt that you're still fighting?
No, he has no doubt. We've been through a lot.
You can see more of Lester's interview with Deborah and Mark Tice tonight, exclusively on NBC Nightly News, 6:30 Eastern. Coming up, New York City declaring a state of emergency over monkeypox. We'll talk about what's being done now. Plus, did you catch this? Beyonce changing a lyric in one of her new songs, something another artist also just removed from one of hers. That's one of our 5 things later on. A state of emergency declared on monkeypox in New York City. Mayor Eric Adams making that announcement today because cases are rising really fast there. Cases in New York making up 25% of everything nationally. But all over the country, it's kind of a similar story. Monkeypox is spreading really fast. Nearly every state here in Washington and in Puerto Rico, that's where it is. So what's being done about it? The Biden administration is releasing 800,000 vaccines from the federal stockpile so that more people can get their shots. But there's concern now from public health experts that not enough is being done on a national level. I want to bring in Dr. Natalie Azar. And Dr. Azar, the Biden administration, you got New York declaring this public health emergency for the city itself. The White House has been reportedly having discussions, health officials thinking about whether to declare a public health emergency for the country. Explain how that would help and what you think we need to do here to get a handle on monkeypox nationally.
Well, I think it definitely will help. I mean, because there's a lot of issues with our public health system in this country, but one of the major issues is that states have a lot of power and independent from the federal government, and that's technically a good thing, but that also limits the amount of federal aid that a state can have or even asks for. So with the ability for the federal government to say, listen, we need to do this, we need to do X, Y, Z, we need to, we did this with COVID, right? It's like, we're going to go in and this is how we're going to do testing and this is how we're going to make vaccines available. They're kind of taking a little bit of the power away from the states, Hallie, but in a way, that's kind of what is needed right here. We've talked a lot about sort of these fundamental issues that we've had with our public health infrastructure in this country, and one of those is this division of labor, this division of power. So, declaring the public health emergency, that it's more collaborative between labs, between states, so that we're not, for example, just having public health labs running the testing, but commercial labs will be able to do that, and funding, because that's really what it comes down to, is funding for enabling these labs to function, as well as access to treatments and vaccines.
Dr. Natalie Azar, thank you very much. Good to see you. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, for the first time in months, a ship carrying grain left Ukraine today, headed for Lebanon. The shipment's part of a deal brokered by the UN and Turkey to help the global food crisis. Number 2, the company that makes Banana Boat sunscreen says it's now issuing a nationwide voluntary recall of 3 batches of spray specifically for the hair and scalp. It says a review found some of that sunscreen had trace levels of a benzene carcinogen, and that people should throw out or return cans with December 22, February 23, or April 24 expiration dates. We've got all that info up on our website, so check it if you happen to have that bottle. Number 3, Beyonce changing a lyric in one of her new songs after coming under fire from some people in the disability community. The song Heated had the word spaz in it, which is considered a slur against people with disabilities. Fans on the internet pointed out it comes from the word spastic, which is a medical term. A rep for Beyonce says it is going to be replaced in the album, that it was not used in an intentionally harmful way. Lizzo also removed the same word from one of her new songs. Number 4, a bunch of jewelry that Elvis Presley gave to his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, is going up for auction this month. The collection has 200 pieces, rings and watches and chains. It also includes Elvis's guitar from his famous comeback special in 1968. His former wife, Priscilla, providing a lot of the items. Number 5, Star Trek actress Nichelle Nichols has died at the age of 89. She was a groundbreaking performer who became a notable character on the sci-fi series when it was pretty rare at the time to see a black woman in a big role on primetime TV. She broke barriers by having one of the first interracial kisses on U.S. television, a scene that she said changed TV forever. When we come back, we're on the ground in Kansas because abortion is on the ballot there tomorrow, the first time abortion is on a ballot anywhere in the post-Roe era. We'll talk about what's at stake coming up. The fight over abortion rights front and center in Kansas, a state that is set to become the first in the country to vote on abortion access after the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade. That means that on the ballot, quite literally, are state constitutional protections for abortion. In 2019, the Kansas Supreme Court settled that, ruling that the state's constitution guaranteed that people could have the right to an abortion. But tomorrow, voters are going to be able to change that. They're going to be able to literally amend the Constitution and take those protections out if they choose to do so. And look at this map here, right? Because Kansas is kind of an island when it comes to abortion access regionally. Its 5 clinics don't just serve people in Kansas, but also in nearby Missouri, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Texas, all states that have recently banned or really restricted abortion rights. Dasha Burns is live in Overland Park, Kansas. Dasha, bring us up to speed about what's happening here.
So, Hallie, if you watch the airwaves here in Kansas, you might get pretty confused about what exactly is on the ballot tomorrow. The Value Them Both Amendment targets that 2019 Supreme Court decision you mentioned there to remove abortion access rights from the Constitution. But what happens from there is the power then goes to the state legislature here, which is heavily conservative. So they would have the option to then further restrict abortion in the state, or as activists fear, potentially ban it. But if you talk to those behind the Value Them Both Amendment, they say that the goal is not a ban, but rather to keep the existing regulations in place to make sure that those are protected. But abortion rights activists say that those regulations haven't been challenged, that they are pretty strict here. There's a 24-hour waiting period, mandatory counseling, parental consent for minors on the books here in Kansas, and a 22-week limit on abortion. But the stakes are incredibly high because, as you said it there, Hallie, this is kind of an island in this entire area. Providers here tell me that if abortion were to be banned in Kansas, they would have to be sending people to New Mexico, to Colorado, to Chicago, people traveling for many hours, potentially days, in order to seek the procedure. And so you've got a lot of people really engaged in this issue, despite the fact that this is a primary. typically smaller voter pool. A lot of folks here are really paying attention and are really engaged. We've seen first-time canvassers, boots on the ground, out in the streets, knocking doors. I want you to talk to just a few of the folks, two different sides of this issue, but equally passionate as they've been knocking on doors here over the last several months. Take a listen.
If you have any pro-life feelings or thoughts that you might have on the stance, this is the time to do that. We might not have another opportunity for a long time for our voices to be heard.
I felt really strongly about Roe versus Wade being overturned, and to very quickly learn that Kansas was going to be one of the first states that were going to make a national stage to let people know what voters think about this. It scared me. It absolutely scared me.
And Hallie, the eyes of the nation will really be watching what happens here tomorrow, because it is a big bellwether about whether or not this is an issue that engages voters, gets folks to turn out. And if Kansas, which is a fairly conservative state, even if the vote is close, that would say a lot. But if the no vote wins, if the folks that are in favor of abortion rights, who are pushing the no vote, if that is successful, then that will really say a lot and send quite the message ahead of the midterms, Hallie.
Dasha Burns, live for us there in Overland Park, Kansas. Dasha, thank you very much. To tonight's Original Now, with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been keeping an eye on. And tonight, with, as you saw, primaries, votes happening all across the country tomorrow. TikTok and campaigns, including in Florida, where some candidates running for office are using a new weapon, not so secret weapon, to try to reach voters. TikTok, still a relatively new campaigning tool, and not everyone running is doing it. And in fact, some suggest that it is problematic. Take a look at our reporting here. Sure, you've seen the dances, the lip syncs, the trick shots, but it's a different kind of content starting to trend on TikTok ahead of the midterms. Political campaigning.
This is the year we find out if TikTok can affect a U.S. election.
Ken Russell's a Democrat running for Congress in Florida. He's jumping on viral challenges and trending audio to get views and to get a message out.
Really, whatever news is happening in the day, a lot of things that I see on TikTok that I want to either respond to, but it's a blend of humor and wit and accessibility.
Take this stitch, for example. Russell dropping it.
Hey, are you registered to vote there?
To remind people to register to vote. Seen by 6 million people and counting. Labeled absolutely unhinged by one meme account. With Russell responding, campaign promise, less hinges. And he likes the back and forth with people in his comments.
For them to hear someone that is an elected official or someone running for office who actually hears them, responds, and takes their concerns into a policy concept, it's very engaging for people.
Not everyone's so into this TikTok trend. In a different race in Florida, Republican Senator Marco Rubio is on attack about it, going after his Democratic opponent, Congresswoman Val Demings, for her campaign's videos on the app, which is owned by a Chinese company, ByteDance.
The evidence suggests China is also snooping on TikTok users.
A new Rubio ad online accuses Demings of posting TikToks, quote, despite major security concerns, and says Marco Rubio fights back against communist China. Val Demings makes TikToks. The senator was asked about candidates who use the app.
It's reckless, irresponsible, and in my view, unexplainable.
His campaign tells NBC every time Demings shares a TikTok, she irresponsibly encourages Americans to use a platform that leaves their personal information more vulnerable to China. TikTok has said all its American user data is stored in the U.S. and backed up in Singapore, not China. But the Demings campaign says there's an audience on TikTok, telling NBC News they're working relentlessly, they say, to meet voters wherever they are, in person or online, in our fight to defeat career politician Marco Rubio. Adding, while Rubio talks tough on China, he refuses to show up and do the work to help America compete.
And I need you to take this journey with me on this people-powered campaign.
Demings' videos racking up nearly 3 million views on issues like gun violence, LGBTQ+ rights, and abortion access.
The decision is a blow to women's rights to control their own body.
They're not technically ads, since TikTok has banned traditional political advertising, and that's partly why some Republican strategists say TikTok is not necessarily the best option for politicians looking to raise money and register voters.
Reaching them in different channels besides TikTok. That's on YouTube, that's on Facebook, that's on Instagram, that's via text message, that's via email. And so Republican campaigns are focused on those more high impact channels for reaching younger voters, and voters of all types.
TikTok's still relatively new. Remember, back when Facebook and Twitter were in their infancy, the 2008 Obama campaign used them pretty successfully to reach younger voters, nearly 2/3 of whom supported him. Ken Russell, that Florida Democrat in the piece, tells us there's a lot of political engagement on the app, and that's why he likes using that platform to entertain and educate a lot of people. Coming up, how a bunch of folks saved a shark stuck on a beach. That's next in The Local. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Southeast Bureau, Atlanta's Midtown Music Festival, which is huge. It brings in like tens of thousands of people. It's been canceled this year. It was supposed to happen next month with My Chemical Romance, Future, Fall Out Boy, many others. Organizers say it's not going to happen because of, quote, circumstances beyond our control. But the Atlanta Journal-Constitution is filling out that picture. They're reporting that the decision is linked to the state's law that essentially allows guns in public parks and the festival's no weapons policy. From our Northeast Bureau, here's a different kind of shark story for you. A group of people at a beach in Ocean City, Maryland, saved a shark that was tangled in a fishing line. They had to pull it out of the surf. That's what they're doing here, so they could pin it down and then get a hook out of its mouth. They then sent the shark back home. No bites. From our Midwest Bureau, somebody in Illinois won that giant Mega Millions. You probably know that by now. What we still don't know who it is. Have they checked their ticket? Do they know that they won $1 billion? Are they going to stay anonymous? Because in Illinois, you can do that. Whoever won has a year from the date of the drawing to claim their prize, but only 60 days to pick between the cash option or annual payments. Cash would be like $780 million. I mean, you're paying taxes on that, but still, what did the ticket cost you? $2? That's definitely a return on the investment if you are the winner. Back to that breaking news now, coming out of Washington and specifically from the White House. NBC's Ken Delaney is joining us now. And Ken, we're looking ahead to President Biden speaking from the Blue Room balcony, I believe, from the White House tonight. We now have more details that you and our team are reporting on the target, who this strike was against. Fill us in.
That's right, Hallie. NBC News has confirmed, Kristen Welker and I, with two sources familiar with the matter, that the United States conducted an operation that killed al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri, the 71-year-old mastermind of 9/11, whose whereabouts have been a mystery for many, many years. There was a $25 million reward on his head. He last published a video in 2019, and yet this has still been behind the scenes, as was the case with Osama bin Laden, a goal of the U.S. intelligence community, and a group of people were devoted to finding Ayman al-Zawahiri. We've yet to learn the details of exactly what type of operation was carried out, how he was found. Those things are all going to be very interesting to learn. But a major, major development, the leader of al-Qaeda, who helped plan the 9/11 attacks, now dead, we are being told.
Talk through the significance of this more, Ken, and how it relates to something we talked about earlier in the show, which is this strike happening in Afghanistan at just about the year mark of when the United States, led by President Biden, obviously withdrew from that war there.
Yeah, that's right. And I should add that the Taliban publicly confirmed that there had been what they call the U.S. drone strike carried out on Sunday in Afghanistan. So that gives us some indication of what may have happened. But look, it's hugely significant. Another question, though, Hallie, is to what extent, if at all, was the Taliban harboring Zawahiri? Did they have knowledge of his whereabouts? That's going to be an important factor in terms of how the U.S. Is dealing with the Taliban. That was the reason the United States invaded Afghanistan, because the Taliban was harboring al-Qaeda. Another interesting thing here, though, is, look, the threat from al-Qaeda has clearly waned. It's clearly less than it was at one point. And in fact, U.S. intelligence officials have said pretty bluntly in congressional hearings that al-Qaeda and ISIS, for that matter, no longer have the capacity to strike the United States. And it's the kind of complex operation that was 9/11, or even anything close to that. But nonetheless, it's a virulent jihadi ideology that persists in Afghanistan and other places. And Zawahiri was an important inspirational leader. And the fact that he's been killed by the United States shows that the United States and the CIA do not forget, and they will pursue enemies of the United States to the ends of the earth and for as long as it takes. Yeah. And much with the operation that killed Osama bin Laden, President Biden is going to have, this will be a feather in the cap of the president who ordered this operation.
Ken Delaney, and great reporting. Thank you. We'll look for more from you and our team tonight when President Biden speaks. Appreciate it. We are getting some new video into us now of a well-known Iranian journalist getting back to her New York City home to get her things after some guy went up to her front door with an illegal military-style rifle. Masih Alinejad says it's part of a plot by Iran to kill her, and 2 law enforcement sources tell NBC News it very well could be. Check out the ring video here. This is the person, the man, who's now in federal custody facing a federal gun charge. You see this? Put something down. Outside her home today, Alinejad, who, by the way, is an outspoken critic of Iran's leadership and its record on women's rights and human rights, says the U.S. should treat this like an act of terrorism. She says she is not afraid of threats from Iran. Watch.
Look, I have only 2 options: to feel miserable because of all these threats and thinking about when they're going to kill me, or I have to make my oppressors feel miserable. I choose the second one.
Let's go to Jonathan Deans. Tell us more about this case, about the person arrested, and about the sort of Iranian journalist and activist at the center of it all.
All right, well, first, the suspect, he's Khalid Mahdiev. He's from Yonkers, New York. He's 23 years old, and the FBI and police say he was armed with an AK-47 with 66 rounds of bullets, and that he'd been surveilling her house, they say, for about a week or several days, over a week's time. And he went through a stop sign that enabled them to pull him over, search his car, and that's where they found the weapon. She says she believes the Iranian government is behind this, that it was a plot to target her. She is an outspoken critic of the Iranian regime, very outspoken for women's rights in that country. She has millions of followers on social media, and she believes this was an effort to intimidate her, perhaps kidnap her, perhaps even kill her. The FBI and police not yet saying that he's only charged with a gun charge at this time, but the investigation very much ongoing as they're obviously concerned, and she has around-the-clock security, and she's been in and out of safe houses for some time, given past threats to her.
And today is not the first, as you say, she's been in and out of safe houses. This is not something new necessarily to her. And as you heard in that soundbite, which I know some of your team members got, it's not she's not going to back down.
Right. This is the second plot in a year, she says. The FBI a year ago charged 4 Iranian agents with an alleged plot to kidnap her from her Brooklyn home and try to get her back to Iran in what she says was an effort to silence her. There were federal charges filed out of New York. Those Iranian operatives are still inside Iran, so they cannot be touched at this time. But she believes this is now the second time in a year. This time a man showing up at her door outside in his car was an AK-47 with all those rounds. She says it's not a coincidence that it comes within a year of the past kidnapping plot. The FBI and the PD are trying to figure out if this man was acting on his own and perhaps was working off past media reports, or if he was hired, because they found $1,000 in cash inside his car.
Jonathan Deans, great reporting as always. Thank you. Still to come here on the show, the NFL suspending Deshaun Watson for violating the league's personal conduct policy. But it's not like this whole thing is settled. We'll talk about what's next for the star quarterback and the team he plays on after the break. Trial starting today for the Justice Department, working to block this huge multi-billion-dollar merger between 2 big publishing companies, Penguin Random House and Simon & Schuster. You've probably heard of them. There were opening remarks in this federal antitrust trial today. A very big deal, because if this merger were to happen, it would mean that this already, tightly controlled book publishing market gets even more tightly controlled. And you've got some big old names joining the proceedings, like Stephen King. I know you know him. He's expected to testify tomorrow as a star witness for the government. Yes, for the government. The author of The Shining, the author of Carrie. He's against this mega merger by these book publishers. The government says this kind of thing could hurt authors like King, could hurt readers, because it would give Penguin Random House a lot of influence over which books are published in the U.S. It could potentially reduce how much the writers, the authors, get paid. It could mean you have less choice in the books that you want to choose from. On the other hand, the publishers say the merger would actually strengthen competition to find and sell the most popular books. Regardless, the case is a big test of the Biden administration's antitrust policy. NBC's Danny Savalos is joining us now. And Danny, you don't often hear like Stephen King, huge multi-billion-dollar trial, published. Like, these are all these buzzwords that don't often come together in a federal case. Talk us through it.
Antitrust is so complex, but whittled down, it's really the idea that when the government becomes concerned that a company's merger with another company will take over the market and create a kind of monopoly, that will destroy competition. And when competition is eliminated, consumers, regular folks, suffer. That's the idea behind antitrust, because at its core, antitrust punishes extreme success in the case of a merger between two gigantic companies. And the argument in the complaint that the DOJ makes is that if allowed to merge, then mainly authors and then trickling down consumers like us will suffer because there won't be any competition. The DOJ argues that as it is, the big five are sort of the big publishing giants, and everybody after that is kind of the farm team. So this is a situation that will even further consolidate power in one entity and lead to lower prices paid or advances to book authors, and then somehow higher prices for us, which is what all monopolies lead to.
So if you're looking at this from the position that you are as our legal expert, how do you handicap it? Who has the legal leg up here?
It's so hard in antitrust cases. But it's interesting you mentioned Stephen King. You know, in a sense, it's not a surprise that an author would be testifying for the government and against the publishers, because authors are the ones that stand to lose the most by this merger. On the other hand, what's unusual is that it's Stephen King, who's arguably
a big author,
one of the most successful authors of all time. Because if anybody gets to compete or command high fees from these publishers, it's going to be Stephen King. You want to get some nameless schmo from Brooklyn who's trying to write the great American novel and is totally unnoticed. That's the person who's going to suffer as a result, at least according to the DOJ's theory. Now, of course, the publishers completely deny that. They argue that DOJ has made up a market and then made up their control or their supervisory control of this market.
Danny Savalos, don't you dare disparage the nameless schmoes in Brooklyn writing the next great American novel. That is our core demo, friend, on this show. Okay, thank you.
Our hipsters, we love them.
Danny Savalos, thank you so much. Appreciate it. So the NFL today says it's reviewing a decision of a league disciplinary officer who suspended Deshaun Watson, the superstar quarterback for the Cleveland Browns, without pay for 6 games. Why? Because he violated the NFL's personal conduct policy. The judge calling what Watson did an egregious act. We'll talk about that in a second. But here's Watson at practice today. More than 20 women had accused him of sexual misconduct during massage sessions after he reached out to them on social media. He settled lawsuits with all but one of them. As a condition of getting reinstated, Watson can now only use club-approved massage therapists in club-directed sessions for the rest of his career. Watson has denied any wrongdoing. He promises to clear his name. An attorney representing the women says today in a statement, none of this would have happened without one brave voice. Sam Brock is in Miami covering all of this for us. Can we just talk about this suspension for a second, Sam? Because when you compare it to what we've seen for other players and other violations, you've got the Falcons, Calvin Ridley, who got suspended for a whole season for betting on NFL games, right? You have these claims against Watson, and it's a 6-game suspension. You see others on your screen here, whoever you're watching. What is the rhyme or reason for how much each player gets, and what's been the reaction to this particular suspension?
I mean, there's obviously outrage. There's no question about that, Hallie. As it has been explained to me, why does Calvin Ridley get 17 games for betting on the sport, or DeAndre Hopkins 6 games for using performance-enhancing drugs, which, by the way, is the same suspension as of now Deshaun Watson has? What I was told is because those things tarnish the integrity of the game. That has to do with what happens on the gridiron with Deshaun Watson that is off-the-field material, and that basically you're looking at a system right now where this isn't a civil proceeding. It's not a criminal proceeding. It's the the NFL, with its own sort of judicial parameters, they're deciding what personal conduct is, what the measures are that are being met or exceeded when it comes to sexual assault or violating the integrity of the game. That's what the judge talked about. But traditionally, she did say, Hallie, that you're only seeing a 6-game or more suspension when there's violence involved, and that this was a non-violent act. But I guarantee you, if you talk to people who have been the victims of sexual assault, or those who advocate on their behalf, they will tell you that inherently sex assault is violent. But that's how they drew that line.
You said something important, which was for now, that's what the suspension is, because the league could appeal this. Now, it would be the league appealing the league, kind of in a way, right? Is that going to happen?
That's exactly right. Roger Goodell is the commissioner of the NFL. The expectation, Hallie, especially with the NFL so concerned about public perception on this issue, is that they will appeal. Right now, it's 6 games. They were lobbying for a full season of suspension, which would be 17 games plus the playoffs. It is possible that once this gets appealed, if it does, and the league looks at it and Goodell looks at it, they decide, well, we'll keep the games at 6, but we're going to fine you $5 million or $10 million. As it stands right now, this is also one of those things that people are finding unconscionable. Deshaun Watson just received the richest guaranteed contract, $230 million in the history of the NFL, Hallie.
Yeah, Sam Brock, glad you're on the story for us. We'll look for more of your reporting tonight. Appreciate it. That does it for us this hour. A busy one, a lot of news coming in. We're going to have more tomorrow. Same time, same place. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.